All right, today I'm going to take one of the most common questions that dumpees ask about dumpers, which is, will they come back if they're emotionally unavailable? Now, just so we're operating under the same framework, I am personally going to define a dumper who is emotionally unavailable as someone who is not comfortable sharing feelings or emotions with others. Often, they can even be tone deaf to showing any kind of sympathy or empathy too. So does this type of person ever come back after a breakup? As you can imagine, the answer is a little nuanced, but in all, I'm going to argue that there's a point where they have this extreme bout of nostalgia and consider the possibility. However, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll act on those feelings. First things first, we need to dissect the emotionally unavailable equation. I don't know if it's just me, but I've personally always struggled with diagnosing emotionally unavailable people. And an argument can really be made that I was exposed personally to more emotionally unavailable behavior in the past 10 years now. At least that was until I came up with the following equation. So emotionally unavailable behaviors equal avoidant behaviors. So essentially, by understanding the avoidant attachment styles, specifically dismissive avoidant attachment styles, we can understand the core reasons for why someone is emotionally unavailable. So what is an avoidant attachment style? Theoretically, someone with an avoidant attachment style is someone who has a tendency to distance themselves from their partner. Usually, this is because their caregivers failed to meet certain needs, such as emotional support. So they learn to suppress those needs and emotions to self-soothe, meaning that even though they have a natural human craving for connection at heart, they feel safest alone. But really what we need to understand is there's a root cause for an emotionally unavailable dumper's avoidant persona. Often, the avoidant is an avoidant or has avoidant behaviors because their primary caregivers were not meeting certain needs. Usually these are emotional needs. This teaches the avoidant or the person who is emotionally unavailable from an early age to self-soothe, and thus it creates this kind of lone wolf complex. Colleague Dr. Tyler Ramsey talked about finding an emotionally unavailable dumper's core wound. According to him, an avoidant has a core wound based around fear. Essentially, they fear anyone who threatens their independence, which, as you can imagine, relationships certainly do. It's stubbornness on a pretty deep level, and it's really hard to overcome. In fact, I'm immediately reminded of Plato's allegory of the cave in relation to their behavior. Now, essentially, if you haven't heard the allegory of the cave, if you apply it to all sorts of facets of your life, or at least to understand the point of it, it really explains a lot, and it's going to explain a lot about avoidance right here. So here's how the allegory goes. Imagine you're imprisoned in a cave with other prisoners from an early age. All you see around you is darkness and some flickers of light from a fire in the distance, and you see these shadows, but you don't know what the shadows are. They're constantly moving. You come up with all these explanations for what they could potentially be. This is your entire life, your entire existence. It's all you've ever known. And almost no one ever escapes the cave until one day you finally do. And suddenly you're exposed to the wonders of the outside world. You go through this personal renaissance of learning everything you possibly can. One day you decide to travel back to the cave and tell the other prisoners that there are wonders of the outside world that they need to see. But you're met with skepticism. No, life is not all about this cave. There's a sun, there's a sky, there's beauty to be found, but the people, the prisoners, aren't buying it. In fact, they view you with such skepticism that they try to kill you. This is all they've ever known. It's in their entire life, their entire existence, and you're coming and trying to upend that. They're not buying it, and so they attack you. Now here's the point. Often with an avoidant, trying to convince them that they should be with you after they've dumped you is akin to you going back into that cave and convincing the prisoners. The emotionally unavailable dumper has most likely been an avoidant their entire lives. It's their way of coping, their only way of knowing how to exist. You coming and trying to convince them that there's another way, that they can have a relationship that's healthy, open, secure, that there's trust, that they can open up. You're met with skepticism. Personally, that's an assault on their independence. And without their independence, they'll be laid bare. They don't have any way of coping. And that kind of vulnerability is not often easy for them to bear. But that doesn't mean they don't consider getting back with you. Now, we've noticed kind of an interesting thing, and I've been calling it the nostalgia factor. After an emotionally unavailable person has discarded you, that they actually begin to fantasize about you. It took me personally a long time to figure this out. So ultimately, here's what we learned. When an emotionally unavailable person feels like they have their independence again, they allow themselves to feel nostalgia for that past relationship. This is making a few assumptions, though. If you were too aggressive in your pursuit of fixing the relationship during the breakup, they can sometimes skip over the nostalgia phase and simply just move on. Additionally, just because they're having nostalgia about you, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act on their feelings. You see, the interesting thing about emotionally unavailable people is they often fall victim to this idea of a phantom ex syndrome. An avoidant person often has a story of a perfect ex in a relationship that wasn't fully realized, the one that got away, to whom no one can measure up. The phantom ex operates because there is or was distance, not because the relationship was successful, but a fixation with a past partner affects budding new relationships, blocking them from getting close to someone else. Just the knowledge that this person is out there is enough to make any new partner seem insignificant by comparison, a subconscious distancing strategy. Look at how on brand this is for them. By concocting this idealized partner, this one that got away, it's essentially a perfect excuse to keep all relationships at an arm's length. No one will ever be able to measure up to this perfect person. Thus, they hold on and protect their independence. So weirdly, fawning over failed relationships is part of their process. That nostalgia will happen if you give them space because it's literally their way to protect themselves. But do they ever come back on their own accord? This is kind of the $1,000,000 question that many people are left wondering. Now, if you've ever been to my website, Ex-Boyfriend Recovery, then perhaps one of the things that you may have potentially noticed is that I encourage men and women to be a lot more active than most of my peers. While most of them are preaching, let the man come to you, let the female come to you, I preach, give them some space and then be active. It's because I've always felt that playing hard to get alone isn't an effective strategy in these circumstances. Only when I started learning about attachment styles did I really see this kick into overdrive. Now, according to a poll on our Facebook support group, most of our clients are dealing with dumpers who are avoidant and emotionally unavailable. And everything I've researched and experienced says that if you just leave the avoidant alone, they won't usually take any meaningful action to win you back until way down the road. And usually I'm talking about years later. In fact, we see this happening as early as the no contact rule. So contrary to popular belief, most exes will not contact you during the no contact rule. Why? Because they're avoidant. Usually our clients have to be active if they want a reconciliation to occur. And the key factor that everyone misses in the industry is that timing matters really a big deal with emotionally unavailable exes. If you're being active in a space where an ex hasn't hit that nostalgia phase, you'll be looked at with annoyance. So half the battle is about timing your reach outs and value ladder work when an ex is in nostalgia mode, but not being overbearing about it. And the sad fact is that half of the time, if you do get these emotionally unavailable exes back in the relationship, that relationship will fail. So to answer your question, do exes ever come back on their own accord? Emotionally unavailable exes, do they come back on their own accord? No, unless you are active and time things correctly. And in that case, yes, they can come back. But you need to understand that getting them back and keeping a relationship alive are two separate problems. And the only thing I'm looking at here is, can they come back? Which the answer is yes, but, and what matters more to me isn't that you get your ex back. What matters more to me is that you find your person, whether that's your ex or not. And so I'm going to encourage you to think very carefully before embarking on this adventure. It's really not that it can't be done. I feel we've mastered the art of reconciliation. It's more about asking if the dumper is worth the effort, if they're that person for you. And sometimes you need some space to figure that out.